buttons to be able to repost. And if you're Todd Blanche, you're sitting there arguing whether or not your client actually meant or
who exactly David Pecker is. Remind us all about the role he has played generally.
Yeah, so David Pecker, the prosecution's first yesterday. First thing he said that was interesting, he said, for the tabloids, meaning National Enquirer, we used checkbook journalism and we paid for stories, meaning they paid sources. They used the power of their finances to shape their coverage. Another thing David Pecker said is that the only thing that was important was the cover of the magazine. We've all been in the supermarket checkout line and seen the covers of those magazines. And finally, David Pecker said, Dylan Howard reported directly to me. Dylan Howard was David Pecker's primary lieutenant, probably not going to testify in this case, but we're going to hear that name a lot.
But here's why it becomes important. This August 2015 meeting, right, all goes back to not only his job description, but whether he was the eyes and ears of Donald Trump for these moments, which lays the foundation for why he would be called first by this prosecution team, right? That he would be somebody to say, this is all part of an overarching scheme to try to prevent this from harming the election.
Eyes and ears, key phrase relating to David Pecker. And look today for testimony from David Pecker about this crucial August 2015 meeting. The participants included David Pecker, Donald Trump himself, and Michael Cohen, who, of course, will be testifying later in the trial. And this, we believe, is the meeting where they first got together and discussed, okay, Donald Trump's throwing his hat in the political ring. He's going to be running for president. We need to work together to find stories that might be harmful to him and to suppress them. And also, by the way, to put out stories that might be harmful to his opponents. So when you hear reference to the August 2015 meeting, this is what they're talking about.
But really important here, Caitlin, is that the prosecution has to actually establish, not through innuendo or intimation, that there was some sort of an agreement. Remember Michael Cohen famously testifying on the Hill and beyond to suggest that Donald Trump does not give explicit orders, more along the lines of, oh, this is a nice place you got here. Hate to have anything happen to it. They've got to actually prove some kind of connection here to give this witness the most gravitas. Caitlin?
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what David Pecker could say that he heard from Trump directly, what came out of his mouth, another firsthand witness here. And obviously, Paula and Phil is, the Trump team is looking at David Pecker. They found out later on Sunday afternoon, about 3 p.m., that David Pecker was going to be the first witness. They didn't really get a sense of what he's going to testify yesterday, so they haven't really had the opportunity to kind of comb through that. Think about it. They will obviously have the opportunity to cross-examine him. But they know what David Pecker can get to here because he had multiple one-on-one meetings with Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the first witness for the prosecution, this is kind of a duh. Of course you're going to start with David Pecker. Of course you're going to lay out.
Why is it a duh? For people who don't know who David Pecker is, why is it obvious to have him first?
This is going to help frame the prosecution's argument that there was this concerted effort with Trump's active participation to suppress negative stories about him ahead of the 2016 election to help him get elected to the White House. And while David Pecker was not directly involved in paying Stormy Daniels, he had previously paid another woman, Karen McDougal, and to be quiet about an alleged affair, and a doorman who falsely accused Trump of having a child out of wedlock. So we know there are at least 2 stories that he paid to suppress. And then he got wind of the Stormy Daniels case, passed that information off to Michael Cohen, and we all know how that ended, right? With him, Michael Cohen, facilitating this hush money payment. So Pecker is the perfect place for the prosecution to start their story.
Well, and he's someone he's not a Michael Cohen. He's not this hostile witness tweeting things that we can't even say, names that he's calling Trump on air. He was actually kind of jovial on the stand yesterday. He accidentally gave out his phone number. He said hi to the defense table. And I should note, there's Trump holding a newspaper, I believe. He doesn't look very happy going into back into that courtroom, that same courtroom where they just had the hearing, Phil, that did not seem to go well for his team. We'll see what the judge ultimately decides. But Trump is now returning to the defense table where he'll see David Pecker on the witness stand again, talking about their interactions.
Yeah, and we'll see if David Pecker tries to exchange pleasantries, as he did yesterday with the former president. I think you make a great point in terms of setting the stage at the start of this trial. There are going to be so many witnesses that will have a very fiery and probably aggressive back and forth between the defense and the witness, but also the prosecution and the witness. Very heavy moments in the weeks ahead with some of the witnesses, in particular Michael Cohen, who are likely to come up. David Pecker is not that individual. Not only was there some levity yesterday, some laughter as well, but it's also a fascinating way to seize and kind of drive a narrative at the very start, given the types of things that tabloids do for their business, the catch and kill, checkbook journalism, stuff that normal people probably aren't super familiar with, is awfully tawdry and has a lot of famous people involved in it. But I think to Paula's point, the importance, I think we saw it in the early stages yesterday, is how it starts this process for the prosecution, laying out the picture that, no, these weren't just legal fees. This wasn't just paying your lawyer. This wasn't just the normal course of doing business. There was a conspiracy here. There was something involved that was much deeper. And I think that's what we saw the start of yesterday, and certainly I think they're going to continue today.
Yeah. And of course, Jake, the National Enquirer, everyone sees it when they check out at the grocery store. You can see the sensational headlines on it. David Pecker yesterday shedding light on how those covers made it, ones that often helped Trump and hurt his Republican rivals. And now we'll see him testifying against Trump on the witness stand today.
All right, Kaylin, thanks so much. Appreciate it. My panel's here with me, and just the latest update from inside the courtroom. We're told the defendant, Mr. Trump, has re-entered the courtroom holding a stack of papers, some held together by binder clips. One can only imagine what those are. And Laura Coates, let me just start with, before we get to David Pecker and the witness testimony we're going to hear, to review the gag order hearing that happened this morning and whether or not Mr. Trump has violated the gag order. Now, one can argue that the gag order shouldn't exist and Mr. Trump should have the right to say whatever he wants about the jury or about witnesses. And one could argue this case is not a good case, whatever. I'm not going to take a position on that. That's not my job. But it seems pretty clear that he violated the gag order. I mean, these Truth Social posts that were introduced in court today, April 10th, he calls 2 of the witnesses sleazebags. He also refers to Michael Cohen, one of the witnesses, as a serial perjurer time and time again, over and over. He misquotes a Fox News host who said, quote, they are catching undercover liberal activists lying to the judge in order to get on the Trump jury. Apparently, Jesse Waters never said in order to get on the Trump jury. Either way, that's going after the jury. And then last night on a channel called Real America's Voices, Mr. Trump said this.
That jury was picked so fast, 95% Democrats. The area is mostly all Democrat. You think of it as just a purely Democrat area. It's a very unfair situation, that I can tell you.
Now, we don't know the political affiliation of members of the jury, so his saying that 95% of them are Democrats is not necessarily true or based in fact in any way. But again, he's talking about the jury, and he's been told by the court, you're not supposed to talk about the jury.
He knows very clearly what the parameters are. Let's talk about why you have a gag order more broadly, though. It's to ensure a fair trial. Fair in terms of the witnesses not being intimidated into not testifying or feeling as though they have to shape their testimony in a way that will not get them incurring the wrath of, say, a huge following like Trump has, or if this was not a infamous defendant, instead somebody who would feel they could not testify openly and truthfully. It also protects the actual staff of the courtroom and, of course, the prosecution team. Now, you can talk about the judge. The judge let himself out of it, as well as Alvin Bragg, the DA. But if you think about the philosophy saying, the more you talk, the more likely it is you're going to have a witness who will not feel comfortable testifying, or a jury, by the way. Multiple times we had, before the trial began, a juror saying, I think my anonymity has been compromised. I can't even sit on this jury, let alone a juror just yesterday, before opening statements began, suggesting that they too had concerns about it. And remember the actual jury selection. We knew that there were members, at least in the alternate pool of jurors, who actually were supporters of Donald Trump, who were saying that they believed in his policies, for one. We can assume maybe their policy or their politics, but we weren't actually able to hear, because the jury questionnaire explicitly did not include statements about how one votes or how they voted in the elections, only about their feelings more broadly about the defendant and others. And so all of this is the concern of the judge, to say, if you do these things, there'll be threats, intimidation, and possibly worse, and not a fair trial.
So Trump and his attorney right now inside the courtroom are whispering before the judge enters. Dana Bash.
As we wait for the David Pecker testimony to resume, I just want to kind of take half a step back on what happened this morning, and how we who have covered Donald Trump in the political realm, one of the hallmarks of him as a candidate and as a president is that he can kind of say what he wants without much political consequence. I mean, there are certainly people who despise him, but when it comes to
he
his
lost
supporters,
the election.
Well, okay, but he also got, yes, he lost the election.
I mean, that's a political consequence.
He lost the election. I'm not going to argue that, for the record. But from his perspective, I'm talking about, he feels that he needs to say whatever he needs to say to get his message out. In his mind, he doesn't think that there are consequences to this. This forum, this courtroom, pushes back on that in a way that he has never experienced in his adult life, and we're going to continue to see that.
So Trump, we're told inside the courtroom, has been veering from speaking with one attorney to talk to the other, Emil Bove, who's now sitting in the first chair. And let's set the stage for the testimony we're going to hear today, if we can, Ellie Honig, because David Pecker obviously played a crucial role, at least in Trump's mind, in his 2016 campaign, helping to suppress stories that would be damaging and helping to push stories, however nonsensical, against Donald Trump's opponents. And right now I'm thinking about the story about Ted Cruz's dad somehow being involved in the Kennedy assassination, a completely deranged story pushed by the National Enquirer that Donald Trump in May of 2016, when he was still facing off against Ted Cruz, was pushing when he would do TV interviews.
David Pecker is the ultimate insider here. And he and Trump, it's important to understand, they go way back. They used to hang out in Manhattan and hit the party scene together. And they had been doing this catch and kill tactic well before Donald Trump was even a candidate, which, by the way, may come into play when it comes to his motivation. And David Pecker is there from the inception of this particular scheme. August 2015, we're going to hear a lot about that meeting. Donald Trump has now decided he's going to be a candidate. He had announced his candidacy a couple months prior to that. And there's a crucial meeting. David Pecker is there. Donald Trump is there. Michael Cohen there. And they sort of discuss version 2.0 of catch and kill, according to the prosecutors. Basically, now he's a candidate. Now we need to, A, put out stories that might damage anyone who gets in our way, whether it's Ted Cruz, whether it's Hillary Clinton. They did stories on Hillary Clinton, too. And more importantly, perhaps, we need to catch and silence, catch and kill any story that may be damaging to us. Now, it's important to understand, he's crucial to understand how this all works. But David Pecker is probably not going to have any information as to the financial, the front end of that, how the repayment was made from Donald Trump to Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels. He doesn't have to know everything, but he's still a crucial witness.
So, Jim Trusty, let me ask you, Donald Trump is sitting there in court whispering with his lawyers. We have no idea what he's saying, but I've never been a defendant. What are defendants?
Well, you're young.
Not really. Not really.
Give it time.
But what kinds of things are defendants talking about with their attorneys? Obviously, we don't know what he's talking about at this moment, but just theoretically, what kind of conversations happen?
Oh, look, I mean, anytime you have a client who's, high energy and highly interested and an intelligent person, they're going to have questions about every step of the way. They're talking about the gag order hearing. They're talking about what the judge had to say towards Todd. They're talking about what's coming up this afternoon in terms of witness testimony. I mean, all of the above. It's all on the table. I suspect that right this minute, because it's so fresh, they're talking a lot about the gag order as opposed to Mr. Pecker. And, what does this mean? And I have to say, if you're an attorney, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, you know, the C word is a terrible word to hear about yourself, and I mean credibility. When you start hearing a judge, you know, and look, this could be a tongue lashing that's not followed by a whole lot of damage, but, you know, if the judge starts saying you've lost credibility, you know, that's a bad moment.